So I think all of us are going to have some kind of intuitive grasp of what fitness means. We all kind of feel it, we all kind of know it. But what we really want to focus on within this tutorial is we want to break this sort of global macro thing, and we want to break it into parts and be able to analyze fitness in its kind of constituent bits, its constituent parts. And remember that if we're going to analyse something, it means that we're going to break it down and explain each part. Now, we've got these images that are going to help us within this tutorial, because what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different parts of fitness, and we're going to try and relate them back all the time to these four really quite different performance types. Effectively here, we've got two kind of anaerobic performance, one very aerobic performance, and one that kind of sits in between. And therefore, we can look at the different requirements of each of these in terms of the components of fitness. Now, that means that we should get to what these components of fitness are. And we've got them in this blobby type image here of what the components of fitness actually are. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is some yellow and why is some pink? Now, traditionally, we would have described these yellow ones as health-related components of fitness and these pink ones as skill-related components of fitness, like a sub-categorization. If it's useful for you, make a note of that and kind of learn it in that format. And we sort of retain the residue of this difference, but in reality, we're looking at these as a whole group of components of fitness. So, what I'd like to do really is I'd like to take, for example, agility. I'd like to make sure that you guys understand it really deeply. You can describe it, but also you can apply it to a whole range of different performances, okay? So we're going to do that for each of those. So let's get on with it. So what have we got here? We've got CV endurance. Sounds an ever so complex thing. But in reality, we're talking really about the efficiency of the aerobic system to get oxygen to the working muscle. That's what we're talking about. So if we look at the definition here, what do we have? We've got the ability. I like this point because it's called the CV system. Think that the C is cardiac, the heart. The V is vascular. That means the blood and the blood vessels. But here we, in our definition, we've got the ability of the heart. Okay, that's the C, and the lungs. Well, that's respiratory, so it's not vascular at all. But anyway, never mind. The ability of the heart and the lungs to supply oxygen to the working muscle. So look, we're getting oxygen to the working muscle. So as I said before, this is a very aerobic consideration. Okay, a very aerobic consideration. How efficiently and effectively can we continue to get sufficient oxygen to the working muscle so we can continue to do predominantly aerobic work? And for me, it should really have the description of without fatigue in there. Now, if we go back to our examples, of course, where is this particularly important in this performance, in these four performances? And of course, we're going to say that in the marathon running example, this tendency to continually provide oxygen to the working muscles to work aerobically is highly important. Likewise, for the tennis player, especially in between points, interestingly, because you recover aerobically, it's particularly important there. But these two performances at the bottom, the goalkeeper and the pole vaulter, these are very anaerobic performances, so it's much less relevant that they have high levels of cardiovascular endurance, but the ones at the top, they do need that, especially the marathon runner. Okay, next one, we've got muscular endurance. This is going to kind of refocus our attention here. So again, we've got the word endurance in here, but we've got the ability of a muscle group to undergo repeated contractions without fatigue. Now notice we don't have the oxygen word in here, so of course that would insinuate that we are talking about some kind of anaerobic consideration here. This is shorter duration than the CV endurance, okay? So yes, we're talking about repeated contractions. Yes, we're talking about without fatigue, but we're talking about something that might last a minute, maybe up to 3 minutes, but that would be the maximum for this muscular endurance concept. So again, the muscular endurance for someone like our tennis player is going to be hyper important because they can have rallies, especially on clay actually, which is what is being played on here. Those rallies can last 20, 30, 40 seconds, up to a minute. I mean, that would be a long rally to be fair, but you can have long rallies, and the importance therefore of muscular endurance to be able to repeatedly contract and move around the court. For the goalkeeper, potentially, if they've got a lot of sort of broken open play where they're having to make lots of saves and be involved in the game, a lot of potential, that's true as well. For the pole vaulter, I think it's less important. They're much more focused on power and strength than muscular endurance. Again, muscular endurance for the marathon runner is going to be important, but nowhere near as important as the CV endurance. So let's move on. Strength, the ability to overcome a resistance. And for me, this resistance, it's almost like we're talking about quite a large resistance. I think we have to sort of emphasize that. So what would a large resistance be? Yes, it could be a weight that you lift in a gym, of course, and you could need to be strong enough to do that. Or you get stronger to lift heavier ones, perhaps. But in the examples we've got, what is the resistance that's being overcome here? In this example, and in this example, the resistance is the body weight, and the performer is overcoming the body weight in the presence of gravity, and to an extent with a tennis player to air resistance, and they're having to overcome that large resistance by applying forceful contractions to the ground to propel themselves around. So they have to use strength. I mean, I think particularly the goalkeeper and the pole vaulter have to be strong performers to apply large amounts of force to make very dynamic movements. Okay, other things that I think we should look at here. Flexibility. We've got range of movement. We often refer to this simply as ROM. Get used to that term. The ROM possible at a joint. Now let's have a little look here at our performers. Look at our pole vaulter. Look at the range of movement they've got in the spine, in the shoulder and elbow here. They're still applying force through that pole from that hand, even though it's in a really awkward position. Again, look at the arc of the back of our goalkeeper here, trying to arch themselves to be able to catch the ball. Look here at the angle of the shoulder, the flexibility at the hips, the ankle position. You know, these are really good examples of the need for large range of movement at particular joints. Now, I think in the marathon running, it is going to help the performer, but it's not essential. Much more reliant on that CV endurance. Now, let's move on. Agility. I mentioned this one before. The ability to change direction quickly whilst maintaining control. So straight away, I'm thinking personally about games players in there. Okay, because it's a classic example of changing direction and having to be in a controlled kind of environment. The other thing it kind of makes me think about is like SAQ training, speed agility and quickness training, like little ladders and hurdles, really important for sort of agility work. And look, where's agility required here? Well, the goalkeeper is really having to change direction and manipulate their position. The tennis player is moving side to side on the court and front to back on the court. They've got to be agile. Is it important for the marathon runner? Not really. You know, it's one direction, all at the same speed. You know, the bends that they're taking are not particularly severe ones, right? Let's think about balance, keeping the centre of mass of the body above the base of support. Now, if you keep your centre of mass above the base of the board, basically, you know, you're not going to wobble and fall over. So we might want to understand what centre of mass is. That's the concentration of mass in the body. We could also say it's the point in the body where mass is distributed equally in all directions. Don't worry about these specific definitions, but it is a concept. Now, of course, in this example, look at our tennis player here. There's the centre of mass, and look what it's above. The base of support. So it makes sense. Again, look, let me change colour a second. Here's the centre of mass of our pole vaulter, and it's above the support. The support at this point is very narrow, it's the pole, but we see they're in balance because they're achieving that. Now, this we would call this instability here. You've got the centre of mass of the performer about here, and of course they have no base of support, so this is an example of instability, and that's why they're going to come crash into the ground in a moment, because they are not at that point stable and balanced. Well, I mean, they're kind of they're in balance, and I guess that's the other point here. We have to differentiate between the notion of static balance and dynamic balance. Dynamic balance is when we are moving, we stay in a balanced position. Now, coordination is absolutely pivotal to almost all sport performances, because as you see here, it's the ability to use different parts of the body together smoothly and efficiently. So it's really hard to name a sporting technique that involves one single body part. So all sports really require a great deal of coordination, whether it's coordination between hand to hand, hand to eye. You know, there's all kinds of different kinds of coordination. If you're interested in that, you might want to study Fleischmann's abilities. We're not going to get into that here. But again, coordination. Look, this is a particular technique here. This is a particular technique. This is a particular technique. Maybe where coordination is less important from our 4 examples is in the marathon running. Now, I know that a really high quality runner is going to come back to me and say, look, running is a very technical performance. I agree with you, but if we think about running in comparison to, say, moving across the court and hitting a top spinning winning backhand in tennis, we have to acknowledge there's more coordination required in this particular performance. Okay, how have I ended up with that there? That's not what I meant to do. Okay, we're nearly there. Power. Power is strength times speed. Now, many Western sports are based around the notion of power. We take a forceful contraction in the form of strength and we apply it rapidly with speed. Okay, think of something like javelin throwing. It's a heavy up, it's a large contraction, forceful, strong, but we make it a high speed to propel that thing in elite men's javelin out to 90 meters. Not that I can do that, but you know what I mean. So power's at the center of an awful lot, and we're talking about some notion of combining strength and speed. We're also talking about reaction time, the time taken to initiate. Initiate just means start, if you're unsure. To start a response to a stimulus. So again, who needs reaction time of our performers? You know, our marathon runners are not sprint starting to a gun, are they? You know, they're gradually building up. The pole vaulter here, you know, they basically pole vault at their own rhythm, at their own time. But our goalkeeper and our a tennis player, they have to have very good reactions. Think about reacting to a very fast hit serve that's hit towards you, for example. You need to be able to react quickly to that, or a shot being hit high to your left from a penalty, for example. The time taken to respond to that is going to be a very significant factor as whether you stop it or not. So reaction time is really pivotal in that type of performance. The only thing I'd talk about with reaction time is that sometimes we talk about it as a general notion. I think reaction time is very specific. You know, someone who can react fast to a tennis serve isn't necessarily going to react fast to, say, even goalkeeping, because they're very specific sets of information that need to be processed, and that takes practice. Now, that's not to say they can't do it, but you know, you need to go through that experience. And finally, speed. We mentioned it with regard to power. It's the maximum rate at which an individual is able to cover a distance or perform a movement in a period of time. Notice that this does not necessarily emphasize running speed such as sprinting. It could be the speed required for our tennis player, as I mentioned before, to make this side-to-side movement across the court. Okay, or it could be this, you know, in our pole vault example, she's got to move really rapidly down the runway to strike the pole into the ground. I never remember what that little things called in pole vault, you strike the pole into it. Someone can perhaps tell me. But again, our goalkeeper's having to show high levels of speed by getting from, presumably he was in this kind of position a moment ago and he sprung up there really fast to cover that distance in a sufficient period of time to catch that ball. So that speed, of course, is particularly important to that performance as well. They are components of fitness. You need to study them, you need to be able to define them, you need to be able to apply them to a whole range of performances, so get practicing on exactly that skill.